Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things. Hello everyone! It is I, a geek for fun.
Hey, what's up? I'm that Matt kid.
And we have a third guest who didn't introduce herself, man. So why don't we hype up? Is this a first time Geeky Gentleman appearance?
Yes, I've never been on before.
Well, that explains it. We all get the jitters for the first time. Trust me. Matt still hasn't figured out how to get this working, and I'm about to have a crisis every single day we do this. It is. Do you have like a username or anything you want to plug, or do you want to use your real name?
Not really. I'll just go by Carly.
There we go then. We are joined by Carly because we wanted to make sure we had more than just the usual suspects on this, because we felt like this topic that we're going to talk about is so wide in the internet and has so many different fandoms from so many different people, and very specifically in like fan fiction circles or just YouTube circles or wherever you want to find it. It's such a broad topic that it cannot be hoped to be comprehended by two small boys. So we've brought in an extra lovely female guest in order to talk about Star Wars ships. Now, personally, I've always been a fan of Vader's Executor. I think the ship design and the model. No, that would be a very probably just as viewed video, but a much more to go on. We are going to be talking about relationships in Star Wars, and I think to start that off, do we have people's favorite relationship in Star Wars, like the gold standard, before we get into what's maybe considered more trashy subjects?
Yeah, let's go through. Carly, you're the guest of honor. What's your favorite Star Wars ship?
My favorite Star Wars ship?
What's the top tier? What's the S tier of Star Wars ships?
That seems like a very subjective question. I think for most people, S tier would probably be like Leia and Han or Padme and Anakin. My personal favorite is Reylo, and it's obviously also a huge ship. Rey and Kylo or Ben Solo. But yeah, there are a lot of huge ships in Star Wars that you can find thousands of fanfics on. So that's a very debatable topic about what exactly makes the gold standard of a ship.
Right, for sure. I mean, for me, I was not, that's part of the reason why we brought Carly on this, because I was not really into shipping at a young age. And I think she was more into it when she was younger. So I think she has a more of a history with the concept. So for me, I didn't really care all too much about shipping when I was watching the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. So for me, the one I always gravitated towards are the ships that are based in the sequel trilogy. So for me, that's going to be Reylo. I mean, that's the ship that has had such a massive impact on the way Star Wars is viewed in the culture these last few years. I mean, but I do agree that kind of Han Leia is like that gold standard of like the classic Star Wars relationship. What about you, Alfie?
And I think there's a reason why, because we did a previous episode on Geeky Gentleman with shipping. But I think what does justify talking about Star Wars shipping in and of itself, because there is such a very few franchises focus on the love as a power source almost. In love and relationships in Star Wars is like integral to the entire saga. You'd be hard pressed to find a piece of Star Wars media in comics, video games, or anything that doesn't involve a relationship of some sort, be it heterosexual or implied or otherwise. So it really is so focused in on that deciding like which is the one that represents it the best for me is tough. I am a big fan of Reylo. I think Reylo's one of the more interesting ones, just because I also like having a ship that I can also watch them like do cool fight scenes together. Like that just adds that's how you hook me in, right? It's like I don't normally care about this, but you're like, oh yeah, and also they got to like kick each other's shit in really like choreographed wise. I'm like, hell yeah, I'm in. I like the aesthetic of that. And I also think Han and Leia has always been alright for me. Han Solo kind of acts a bit jerkish and kind of like a child in Empire Strikes Back a lot of the time. So I can't really get how that goes. I've always been a fan of Anakin and Padme, just because I really like how awkward they are in Attack of the Clones. I think that's an aspect that gets misread a lot, is how stilted and how like bad their flirting is intentional, because you have a monk and a senator who had never done this before and are really awkward about it. Anakin's good at first, but then he just overcommits and he keeps committing to the line and he ruins it. And then Padme's just kind of freaking out because last time she saw him he was like 10 and now he's Hayden Christensen. So she's kind of like all over the place. Like I'm all here for Anakin and Padme and the tragedy of that and how that all falls apart. Like, I like that. So that would probably be my favourite. But what I find is almost just as interesting on the flip side with all of these relationships in the fandom, be it Reylo, even be it Han and Leia, at least for the first two movies, and Anakin and Padme, there is always the third person. A lot of prequel fans seem to want Padme and Obi-Wan, or even Anakin and Obi-Wan. A lot of original trilogy fans before that final film came out were like Luke and Leia, and some still are. And then with Reylo, fucking Rey and Kylo has been shipped with everyone in that franchise.
Yes. They really have. I mean, when it comes to like the sequel trilogy ships, right? I mean, Kylo and Hux, that's got to be almost as big as Reylo, at least in the in the amount of, maybe not like culturally like overall impact on like just the zeitgeist of Star Wars, but like in the fandom, right? I mean, you know a lot about that, right? I mean, there are tons of them.
Fan fiction wise, Kylux, at least last time I checked, which was probably like a month or two ago, vastly outnumbered every other ship in the sequel trilogy as far as like content that's out there for like fanfics and fan art and things like that. Kylux is actually like, I wouldn't say more popular, because you also have to look at how many people are writing like 20 fics, but it's just one person doing it versus like the amount of people who are looking at, reading, and writing them. So I wouldn't say it's more popular, but it's just as popular easily.
And do you think is there a reason for that? Because, like, again, it's not just like it's just popular for Star Wars. I've seen some of the things. It's like it's popular for other franchises. Like, it is overwhelmingly, this has hit a chord with people. Whether you think it works as a ship or not, it's like there is something there that particular dynamic is hitting that people gravitate towards. And do we have any idea of what that might be? And is that specific to Star Wars? Or is that just people wanting to see more relationships like that and they're not getting it?
I feel like it's personally something that everyone just wants to see in fiction. It's not necessarily a Star Wars thing. A lot of Star Wars fans don't even look for relationships, and they're somehow blind to all the romance that is integral to the plots. But I think it just comes down to Rey and Kylo, and like Kylo and Hux for these two ships we're talking about for the moment. Like, they just had really interesting dynamics, and that none of them really are a typical character we might get in pretty much any other franchise. It's hard to really like, I guess for Kylo, it's hard to like find that archetype exactly in something else. Most people would point to like, I don't know, Zuko in Avatar as probably the closest thing, but it's still not really a perfect comparison. Kylo was just given a lot of really interesting complexity, which makes people gravitate toward him in particular. And then if you relate to aspects of that character, you're going to then probably gravitate towards shipping him towards somebody that maybe you relate to in another way. And for some people, that's going to be a character like Rey or a character like Hux, because those are two very different people.
Mhm.
And yeah, it just kind of depends on your view on relationships and what they maybe should be, or what you're interested in seeing, what you think makes the most interesting story.
Yeah.
And that's something also I bring up, because there is a difference there, right, between the level of, or like, should I say, the reason this certain character is getting a ship, where some people will ship because, even just like, this isn't like a thing or anything, everyone who does that is completely valid no matter the reason, but some people just ship things, oh, I think they just look cute together. That's the only reason I have, and that's the only reason people would need. But then you've got other things. It's like, there is a story here. There is something I want to say with these characters, and so even if I don't like the ship, I'm going to put these two characters together so I can tell this story. And that's where you get like people who like intentionally are like, I think even just George Lucas, I think that's what he was doing with Anakin and Padme. Is Anakin and Padme is a relationship that is doomed to fail. And that's what happens, but it's the reason why it works so well and is so like engaging when you get those moments of Revenge of the Sith, is because it's all just fallen apart. And there might have been a better chance if Anakin had just been celibate, he'd probably been happier, but it wouldn't have been as interesting. So I think there's a lot of fan fiction writers also go down that route, which I can't speak for anyone, but I think that's also what kind of interests me about stuff like Reylo compared to Han and Leia, because Reylo is something that you two are more in the Reylo sphere, and this commonly gets debated. But do you think Reylo was always intended, or was that something that happened naturally as different creators? Because the sequel trilogy like has just kind of been like a baton pass, and some things have been dropped, some things have been carried on. Like, do you think that was always from the start though, that these two were going to get together from like Force Awakens?
It's hard to say. I mean, I never want to like say that I know what a creator was thinking, but for me, at least, I mean, I remember the like, what was it, like the fifth or seventh time we saw Force Awakens in theaters, Carly, back in college. I remember at one point you saying to me like, you know what, I think I kind of shipped those two, and then I watched it,
That would have been
and
the fourth time.
fourth time, yeah.
Yes.
And so then I'm watching it, and for me, and Carly and I have talked about this a lot on our own time. For us, we really did see a lot of what Ryan brings up in Last Jedi in regards to Kylo's complexity and a lot of his relationship with Rey. For us, we actually did feel like we saw that coming based off of Force Awakens. I feel like, yes, the interrogation room scene is supposed to be very intense and kind of unnerving and kind of scary, because I mean that's Rey in this very vulnerable position. But what I think people overlook about that sequence is that Rey then puts Kylo in a very vulnerable position, where it's not just him like reaching into her head, it's her reaching into his head, and they see the same sorts of fears and insecurities in each other. So I mean, I think as soon as you get that scene, and as soon as you have like Kylo princess carrying Rey, like I feel like, to me, I don't see a way it wasn't intentional from the get-go.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. I don't know that it was something that they definitely planned, but it was something that they opened up the possibility to, and they definitely weren't trying to turn off after the first movie. Because there's just too much of like just some of his lines and things, especially the way Adam Driver delivers them. They're just like so gentle almost, even when he's supposed to be threatening. And I think they do intentionally deliver this like vulnerability. And I think it was always like whether or not it was supposed to be romance, I guess, is debatable. But there was always, I feel like, going to be that connection between Rey and Kylo no matter what, because that's where the conflict comes from in this sequel trilogy, is that she sees so much of herself in Kylo and he sees so much of himself in Rey, but neither of them, like, but she's determined not to fall to the dark side. And he is so convinced that he can't come back to the light.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about that is because then you compare that to how Han and Leia turned out, where in A New Hope, it's very much hinted on Han's side, and he's like, "Do you think a princess like that could ever like a guy like me?" And then Luke gives him like the most coldest put down, like in the history of cinema. Like it's so blunt. He's like, "No," it's just like, "Whoa, guy." He really wasn't in the mood, but they could also make the argument that there's just as much, maybe even more so, with Luke, because Leia's the one who kisses Luke, and she's kind of doesn't have any that what we see in Empire, where she kind of is excited by the challenge that Han Solo presents, isn't there in A New Hope. She's just kind of tired of him, whereas Luke's the one she kind of gravitates a little bit more towards. That's definitely something that wasn't planned, because the sister reveal wasn't, Luke's sister was going to be someone else that was going to be in like 7, 8, and 9. So that wasn't in the original thing at all, but there are hints on Han's side that could be there. So you take those two things, are kind of like Reylo. I do agree. I think at least, even if it wasn't going to be romantic, people cannot deny that these characters were created to be diametrically opposed to each other, to be a dyad. Because from the start, because just the imagery alone and the marketing and everything they were going with, that is very clear. The question then becomes like, well, was the Finn romance hints there intended to be anything more, or were they completely just there on Finn's side? And there's a whole dynamic that is really curious to me, because when fans latch onto this, and it's kind of the beauty of Star Wars, is everyone has their own interpretation of this. I know me and Matt have very different interpretations of Star Wars things. That's kind of the fun of it, right? Is it becomes hard once you see what was intended and what has been created through fan requests. Because I think one thing that people can't ever argue is Anakin and Padme we knew was going to happen from episode 1. Because that has to. That's like Anakin's children. They need to happen. We've seen it. The prequel trilogy is the only one I think everyone kind of knew guaranteed going in. These two characters were going to get together. It's just a matter of like when. Whereas that doubt that existed in the original trilogy, and definitely the doubt that existed in the sequel trilogy, almost led to more creativity on the fan side of things. Because if they had been like very upfront, oh yeah, we're doing Rayla, just for some reason they want to spoil everything, the shipping of other characters would have still existed, but I don't think you would have seen why this explosion happened with the sequel trilogy. Is because everyone was kind of like, can we predict this? Is this where this is going? Especially after Last Jedi. After Last Jedi, everyone was like, I know where this is going to go, and I'm going to write that. And there's like an explosion of fics, an explosion of fan art of different things, like what the children would look like, or what Hux and Kylo joined together ruling the universe will look like, or Finn and Rey, or Poe and Finn, which I think is the other one, which is the big one, which we should probably touch on, which sadly was only a fan creation.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason I wanted to talk about Star Wars shipping in general, because I feel like between Star Wars and I guess kind of the MCU, I feel like those couple things really help bring shipping into the mainstream in a way that we've never seen before, to the point where like Reylo and Finn Poe, or I guess a lot of people call it Storm Pilot because it's a catchier name. These were like mainstream things that people talked about on like talk shows and things like that. Like people were asking Daisy Ridley and John Boyega and Oscar Isaac, like, man, are these characters going to get together? Like it became a cultural phenomenon in a way that like up until then. I mean, I remember, hanging out with friends and be like, people who ship and write fanfics are weird and losers. And, because I was immature like that and I wanted to be cool. So, I mean, of course, I made fun of people who I thought weren't cool. But now it's like this huge mega thing that I think Star Wars, the sequel trilogy in particular, is very kind of key in bringing to the forefront recently. And with something like Storm Pilot, it just sucks how many people really gravitated to that, the actors included, and just LGBT fans who felt like they were finally going to get their proper due in real big mainstream blockbuster. I mean, it's Star Wars. It's like one of the cultural landmarks. Like everyone should feel represented in Star Wars. And so it's kind of unfortunate the way that fizzled out and the way that had differing backlashes. Because I mean, Carly, you were part of you've seen kind of the backlash that can happen when shippers go to war.
Yes. Well, yeah, shippers fight amongst themselves a lot. It's a whole community issue.
Now, I mean, yeah, I mean, so what's your take on what happened with Finn and Poe there? I mean, do you think that they should have listened to the fans? Was that a situation where they should have, like, if it was not intentional, they should have listened to what the fans wanted? Because that's something that we kind of have to consider in the social media age. I mean, how much of the sequel trilogy was influenced by shippers, and how much of it should have been influenced more, if at all?
The difficulty behind things like that is I feel like if a creator has like a specific vision, obviously they shouldn't be just looking for what fans want to happen. But the sequel trilogy did not, as like from everything that we've looked at, it doesn't really have a cohesive single vision. Like every person who got the next movie kind of had, like they had some general guidelines probably, but they had a lot of creative control. But what happened specifically with Storm Pilot is just kind of pretty unfortunate because the actors themselves liked to play up that aspect in interviews and things like that. And ultimately, I don't think that anyone, if they perceived it as something that was not in their original story, they didn't need for Poe and Finn to get together. But I also don't see why we needed to go out of our way to show them like with two other people who are women, because that felt like a lot of erasure for a lot of LGBT people who at least would have wanted at least Poe Dameron to like be gay, because I mean, Oscar has said like that he played it that way, and he's kind of called Disney cowards and stuff in interviews because of the fact that they shied away from all that. He very much wanted Poe to be a character who represented people like that, and they didn't go that way. They decided to take a different direction. So it's mostly just unfortunate that like fans couldn't get someone that they saw themselves in like 2019. The fact that supposedly we have like these big franchises and supposedly Disney's like all okay with LGBT rights and stuff, but we've never had a meaningful, important character actually representing that community in anything. And so people really just wanted that with Poe in Star Wars. So that's really just the disappointing thing in that for me. I don't think they needed to get together necessarily. I just think it was unfortunate that the ship was entirely squashed.
Yeah. And it's almost like a double thing, because someone either here or in the comments, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe before The Force Awakens came out, the Last Jedi script was finished. And Rian Johnson, because they were filming a lot of the Act 2 scenes almost back to back, because they wanted to get the location for a set amount of time. So the Last Jedi script was almost already out before The Force Awakens came out. So I don't think they expected, because a lot of the Finn Poe stuff isn't necessarily on the page. I think a lot of that just comes from how great the chemistry is between Oscar Isaac and John Boyega. And I think like the lip bite is like
Yes.
that's added. There's a lot in that performance, and it'd be a shame to say, oh well, they added. No, that is the character. The actor helps take what's on the page and make that character. That's kind of the thing of Star Wars. A lot of this dialogue in every Star Wars movie wouldn't work if that actor wasn't that good. So I do sympathize that they probably didn't see that coming. That was, and by the time they had already written in the Rose Finns thing, the Rise of Skywalker is the one example though where I feel like how Finn and Rose ends is kind of ambiguous, and you can that's where you can keep it or go it. But the fact that they not only abandoned that, and they didn't do the Poe Finn, and they added an extra character, and they added 2 extra female characters, is the one that really feels like you have no excuse. And this is from someone who likes the Rise of Skywalker. That is an aspect where it's like you have no excuse. This feels like this was either corporate mandate or you were cowards. Because I think at that point when they're filming, that is when Oscar Isaac would come out and say, "Hey, can we do this?" Or John Boyega would come out and say, "Hey, can we do this?" And they would get greeted with a no. Explains why they'd be so mad on press tours. That's where I feel like is the biggest shame, because you can adapt to what people are telling you, or you can choose not to rep your own thing. But it's about hearing those voices, and it just makes me question what creative wouldn't want to do that, right? Like, what creative would think this idea and how it turned out was bad, which makes me lean more to the side of just actually Disney being the boot on the neck for that one. But again, until anything gets revealed 10 years down the line and a tell-all documentary, we can't be sure. It is just a shame, but I also hope that because Star Wars Expanded Universe is so big, and we're bound to eventually get post-sequel trilogy content, it's not... I think someone might touch it. I'd be surprised if it never gets touched at all. I would generally be shocked, because Star Wars is kind of one of those things that the moment someone hints something in a fan circle, it will eventually get brought into the canon. That's why all the prequel memes are in the Clone Wars TV series. You wouldn't get Pong Krell saying, treason then, if it wasn't for the fan response. So the fact that Storm Pilot was so huge, I think there's going to be something down the line, and that might be just wishful. But again, it's almost disheartening, because just as much as Raylo was so big, so was Storm Pilot, and that sadly seems to say the message that no matter how vocal the fan response is, these corporations will not listen, which is a very damning message, but it's something you can't give up on. So hopefully it serves as an example. Now that shipping is more public aware and more public in the general sphere, like you said, Matt, hopefully as other big franchises move forward, this will become, this already has kind of become more of a staple. Like you're seeing more people talk about with the MCU. I think the Stucky thing was a recent thing. So Star Wars always influences cinema, and it's kind of strange to think that it will be influencing shipping wars and battles between those kinds, which I think is fun. And on that note, now that I've asked you all what your favorite Star Wars ship, do you have any? I won't say least favorite, because that's just like, that just feels needlessly mean to people. But do you have any ships which you like but will acknowledge are trash?
I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by trash.
That's entirely up to you. I'm just repeating words I know. I'm very uninformed on this topic. I'm trying my best.
Yeah.
Carly, define shipping trash. Go.
Well, I don't know. For some people, that just means like you would ship anything regardless of how compatible they are. If it's like a crack ship, then that's sort of like two characters who you really don't see ever getting together in any way in mainstream canon, but you ship them anyway. And so for a ship like that, my big Star Wars ship is actually Ginger Pilot, which is Hux and Poe. And it's fairly popular, especially after Last Jedi, because it became slightly more feasible once they had some interaction. But I like it just because they're two characters who I think are both really interesting, and it would just be a kind of fun ship because they have a lot of conflict and they're both so diametrically opposed, sort of like Rey and Kylo. Only Poe's a lot more snarky, so it seems fun.
Yeah, I'm actually I like that one quite a bit too. I mean, because Poe and Hux are both so super intense about their respective sides. And they just have I think they have a really fun dynamic, the way they're, like in the beginning of Last Jedi when Poe's doing the jokes with him. I think those types of interactions are the things that like get the wheels turning for people who are into shipping and things like that. Because that kind of interaction is just like golden. It's great. I think one that a lot of people really like that I've never quite understood, but I mean I get it, is like Obi-Kin, like Obi-Wan and Anakin. Like I get it, but I don't like it for a lot of the same reasons I don't really like. Well, actually, no, I don't like Anakin and Ahsoka for way more reasons. But Obi-Kin is one of those ones that like I understand why people are into that. I'm not super into that one myself, but I thought I should at least bring over another ship because I didn't want to have the same answer as Carly.
Yeah, that's one where it's like there's definitely the chemistry between the actors there. Like Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor are just electric together, and I think a lot of what I've seen becomes more popular ships are like dependent on that is how well do the characters play off each other, even if it's a negative sense. Like that Hux and Poe scene in The Last Jedi, that sparked all those ships, I'm imagining, because it's such a good scene between their character dynamic that you can imagine it in some alternative reality, in a more romantic sense. Stuff like that, I think works. Like, for that example, I actually would really like to see just like Force Ghost Yoda hanging out with Palpatine and just talking the shit, like being really kind of passive aggressive with each other, but kind of finding some solidarity. Like all those fan comics of where Palpatine and Yoda just kind of talk together always kind of make me. I wish those two were on screen. I don't know if it counts as a ship. I'll say it's a ship. Why not? I love them both. I don't think that's what I need to write the fic on. Is Yoda Shivda, well, yeah, Shivda, the Senate and the Jedi Council. Yodiv. Yodiv's good. Yodiv's real good. That's some good stuff. Get that hashtag random. So that's something I can understand. And I also think another one which I wouldn't even label this as a crack ship, because this is one that I think people could legitimately believe in, because there is actually some like, whoa, that's a weird scene, is Han and Luke.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Han and Luke's pretty popular too.
They have some smolders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know.
Same thing with like Han and Lando, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And they even play with that in Solo, which was really neat.
Mm-hmm. And then that's an example again of like characters being able to touch that material again. Now that all these years have passed, you get to play that up a little bit more. I wouldn't be surprised if we ever do get to see the recasted Luke hanging out with Han now in like a Disney Plus series or something, and they mention something akin to that as like in a very similar way they did with Lando, just because the people who grew up on these things who might have noticed that can bring it up now, because this content will just keep going forever. And I imagine the same way is gonna happen once we get to, I don't know, the Kenobi series or something. Like I've seen people ship Darth Maul and Obi-Wan, and I mean they have a very intense relationship. I will give them that. Darth Maul only thinks of Obi-Wan, so you've got some grounds for what that entails. But stuff like that, I just think it's interesting, because it is. I think when you get to, as random as they may sound, I think a lot of people don't really give credit to when people are invested in that, and when people write about that, sometimes at great length, it's because they are understanding character dynamics, they're understanding writing, they're understanding flow, and it's got more inherent weight to it. Like something that's just as big as like character battles, right? Is like who would win in a fight, General Grievous or Darth Maul, yada yada. But it often doesn't require an understanding of the characters. It requires an understanding of like text or like feats or whatever. But when people ship, and sometimes random things, if they actually go into it, even if they are like just completely just random 14-year-old who finally got a chance to write this thing and just super cracked up on hormones and just going for it and expressing themselves, they are writing something, they are doing something productive with it, and they are expressing something that only they feel right about that, which I think is why it gravitates to people so much, and why again people get so defensive about it, because a lot of ships become so attached to people who have read so many fics and read so many things that it becomes part of their identity, that if someone shits on the ship, then it feels like they're shitting on them and their investment.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. There's a lot of kind of vitriol that's always existed towards shippers, in probably communities that appreciate more like battling and stuff like that. They prefer those videos where people are just like, who would win? But shipping is something that can be very personal because you have to understand the characters on a pretty deep level sometimes. And when you spend time writing and like making art and just putting your heart and soul into this, and then someone says something about your ship, it can feel like a personal attack. I've definitely been there, where I've felt that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know with Raylo, because that did get so big, that was the thing, even just outside of my circle, I just followed Star Wars accounts and I didn't really see many ships. I would see people just randomly either supporting Raylo or completely attacking Raylo as like its own community, in much the same way like people come out like K-pop stands or something like that. It just became the thing to hate. And I don't know, I think that is partly due to Star Wars, because Star Wars is such a toxic environment as is, that once you introduce shipping wars to Star Wars, it becomes like it's like you're already taking white male nerd rage entitlement, and they're already arguing about the movies. And now that girls are around, and guys as well, but like it is a mostly female audience that are coming in with the fanfics and ships and making that more publicly known. When they bring in, oh yeah, well, I want to talk about this in the films, then the wave comes. It's now you're ruining Star Wars. It's made all about this, and it comes like that. And then scene size of the ship, so that they only care. Like some people will only get into Star Wars because they like Rey and Kylo and they don't care about anything else. It's perfectly valid. People are allowed to enjoy whatever they want. But I find it's interesting that it's so big that it is almost like its own. Like Star Wars has many mini communities. Like some people only like the ships, some people only like the Jedi stuff, some people only like the actual spaceships. But like the fact that like Regular became its own segmented off thing that was like at war with other, not just non-shippers, but like the other ship fandoms once more regular content started coming out, is really interesting, and I think is kind of tied to why the sequel trilogy and kind of took over the internet, because there was just so much people talking about fighting each other over this stuff.
That's a really good point, because I think, and Carly, you can kind of correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think it's fair to say that a lot of the Raylo community, at least the most prominent members of it, tended to be women. And so I think part of the reason there was so much vitriol against the shipping community in Star Wars is because it was exactly that. It was seen as women coming into what had previously been perceived as a male space and fucking girlying it up with their love. Needless, like regardless of the fact that the other two trilogies are love stories. like you know, so I think that's interesting, because I do think Raylo and the shipping community being so much bigger in the sequel trilogy helped bridge that gap and bring in more female fans, which is fantastic. into something that had previously had this impenetrable wall of entitled boyness going on. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably agree with that. I don't think that's unfair to say entirely. Maybe with some colorful language, but um, like I know at least in my personal experience of what I've seen, a lot of the people who just don't like shipping in general do feel like the fact that someone else can come and enjoy this and maybe they weren't enjoying the sequels. So the fact that women are now gravitating toward them and really enjoying them and making them popular kind of makes other people dislike that even more because it's almost like the women are taking Star Wars away from them, even though they've had like 6 movies and TV shows and everything and all these books for decades. Now that women are coming in and enjoying this, it just seemed like the sequel trilogy was getting a lot of attention on social media and regular media, especially in like the realm of shipping. And those were things that the old fans, at least as a whole, or in their very loud online communities anyway, did not like. And it felt like they were kind of losing some of their voice in the Star Wars community, and so they didn't like that.
I mean, it's like stuff that is explicitly Reylo still gets downvoted pretty heavily in like the main Star Wars subreddit. And I'm just like, but guys, it's canon. It happened. It's like one of the main focal points of the story. Like, yes, Ben dies at the end, and that's very tragic, but they had a relationship. I mean, I guess if you want to read them as not romantically into each other and you want to read the longest on-screen Star Wars kiss as not romantic, then hey, you do you. But it's interesting that there's so much vitriol towards this thing that happened and is canon to the story. It's very interesting how that's happened. It'd be like people just refusing to acknowledge that Han and Leia got together.
And like I've seen things of like letters from older fans did exactly that. Like you hated the Return of the Jedi because they wanted Luke and Leia to get together, um, which is ridiculous, right? But it's never changed and it will change. It's just louder now because it's more accessible. It's in our daily lives when we go on Twitter or Facebook or wherever you Instagram even wherever you go, it's always there. Even in cosplay communities, if you're a cosplayer and you pair up with someone to do like a ship thing, people will give you shit in the comments about that. Like if you did like a Raylo photo shoot or something, people will just talk about it and the things like, you should have done this, you hate Raylo, da 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 da. Like it's spread like a virus. But on the positive side, and what I think has been good, that has kind of increased people's enjoyment of something, is I think the influx of shipping from the sequel trilogy success has been an integral part in people coming around on the prequels, because the prequels are probably even more so about just a love story and it's a very courtly love story. Like you got the original trilogy, which is more the modern romance where Han and Leia are kind of bicking and they're flirt fighting, right? And then Reylo's kind of this like mythic spiritual, like kind of like soulmate romance where it's waged on a metaphysical war. They literally can see each other and connect across the galaxy. Like it's on the screen. Like you're not making that up. It's like they try and spell that out as much as possible, but they literally can see and feel what each other are thinking. Like it's on the page. But then you get the prequels, which is about a courtship, and it's the only one that has a wedding scene. It's the only one, those scenes on Naboo when they're like rolling around in the grass and Padme's wearing all these extravagant grass dresses and all these different things. And then episode 3, and Hayden's got the sexy scar, and he's got the long hair, and he comes back and now he's daddy. Like, it's the sexual content in the prequel trilogy is not subtle. And I think people have picked up on that more now that they've realized with the sequel trilogy, oh wait, Star Wars can be like that. wait, let's rewatch those movies. You watch The Last Jedi and then you watch Episode 2, and you're like, oh, I get it now. Star Wars has always been about this. Like, that's something I've really enjoyed, because I've always been a fan of the prequels, and I've only gotten more enjoyment from them. And seeing, as funny as some of them can be sometimes, the Anakin stands, and I love the idea of Anakin and Padme, and like when the Clone Wars teaser came out, and it had that shot of Anakin and Padme almost recreating the Last Jedi hut scene. People kind of like, oh my god, it's the same thing, and it's like it was a good affirmation for me, and I imagine many others who did like that aspect of love in Star Wars. I thought it was powerful, but because it wasn't what the original trilogy had been, because Padme and Anakin weren't Han Solo and Leia, people rejected it. But thankfully, and I hope this continues with Star Wars going more, we're getting to see a greater diversity of relationships, and hopefully that will lean more not just heterosexual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's interesting because there's a dissonance between watching the films and reading the post-Disney buyout novels. Mm-hmm. The books do not shy away from this at all. Like, no, like Singer Rath Velis, blessed be him. He explicitly has a conversation with someone who like hits on him, and he's like, "No, I'm gay. I'm good." Even in Black Spire, Vi Maradi, she has that scene where she's basically just tells the audience that she's asexual.
She tells Cardinal.
Tells Cardinal, yeah. Well, and then she thinks in her head, like, I've never... But yeah, exactly. Like, the books don't shy away from this. And it's not like, they, like, hint, like, oh, this character just randomly has, like, two moms in the background, and that's cute. That's there. But they also very explicitly make it clear what they're talking about. And so there's this frustration I've found being into Star Wars enough to, like, be into the books and the comics, and then go into the movies and being like, there's a depth and a variety here that is not reflected in the films, and that's unfortunate. But I'm glad the material exists in the universe in some form.
I mean, I think the biggest, it's not the example of representation that we'd want, but I think the biggest example of it being explicitly this is the only point of this story would be the book Lost Stars, where it is just Romeo and Juliet in Star Wars. And the fact that got published, and Padme's getting her novels now. There's a lot of obviously a lot of talk about Anakin and her growing up relationships, like with Clovis as well. I think there's been a more acceptance to that, and I think that's just been part of just getting more people to write the stories with having a little bit more freedom. And I hope now that we've got Disney Plus and the original, the main 9 saga is done, that burden of trying to appeal to apparently the mass audience or China or wherever the reasons is for why they're not going gung-ho with this, hopefully that lets up, and hopefully the demand for all of this keeps going, so we can continue to get great Star Wars characters that people can ship whoever they want with. One thing, because you mentioned that, Matt, I do want to bring up, because we've mostly talked about the movie ones. Are there any ships you have from Star Wars that aren't in movies, be it comics, games, or books? Or just lesser known characters?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of really great characters in the books. A lot of people ship Thrawn and his buddy, his pal. Carly, you've actually read the new Thrawn books, or the first one. I have not.
Yeah, Thrawn reads a lot like a Sherlock Holmes book. So pretty much if you are into that Watson Holmes dynamic, then
that's also in the original Thrawn trilogy. Like I haven't read the new books, but the moment you said that, I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah, because in the original,
that's a big ship.
In the original, it's like Thrawn and Pelion, and the new one, it's Thrawn and like Vanto, I think is his name.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, you've got Afra, Afra and her girlfriend, who I'm blanking on the name, unfortunately, because it's been a while since I've read those books. And then you've got characters like Ray Sloan, who was intended to be hinted at as being bisexual.
She's not hinted at. She says it.
Does she?
Yeah.
Okay.
She does.
She's bisexual. I guess Singer and his boyfriend I'm a big fan of. What is Singer's boyfriend's name? They get married. I forget. I'm blanking on it. But yeah, there's a.
Either.
Oh, gosh. I haven't read these in a while. But there's a lot of
Condor Kyle.
Condor, yes.
Yes.
I can't think of many ships from the expanded universe of Star Wars as it exists now that are like non-canon ships that I really like off the top of my head. But I like a lot of the relationships we've gotten that are outside of the films. I remember I really like Obi-Wan and Ventress. I was really into that when I was watching the Clone Wars for the first time. I really thought they had a really interesting dynamic, and I would have liked to have seen more of them together. I know. Can you think of any, Carly?
I mean, for a lot of people, Vi and Cardinal was a big ship in the Phasma novelization, and then once Black Spire came out, and Vi said that she was asexual, I think people still very much like them together as like friends, because they have just a fantastic dynamic. Because he's so straight-laced, and she does whatever she wants. She's a free spirit. So that's a fun ship. I've seen some other ships that I don't necessarily ship, like Ray Sloan and Brendel Hux. Ray Sloan beats him up in the book, and he definitely deserved it, and that's great. So I don't ship it. But some people hate ships is also a thing where just they don't see these characters together romantically at all, but they just ship them anyway. Just because they like the conflict and they think that's interesting. So that's also a big thing.
It's also like looking at two characters who hate each other and just ascribing that to sexual tension.
Yeah, some people say that like pretty much any time characters hate each other, that there is sexual tension there.
Yeah. They'll be like Obi-Wan and Maul, sexual tension, or like Sonic and Shadow, sexual tension. Like they'll look like these two people hate each other, so obviously they want to spend a night together, and that would get rid of all their aggressive feelings towards each other. And I think that can be fun to like play with and like ships and things like that. I think if you're going to try to make a case for why your ship actually works, I feel like you have to defend that a little bit more. But for just people who want to ship something and, write a fun, cute story or make fun, cute fan art, I don't think there really needs to be a barrier of entry.
There shouldn't be a barrier of entry regardless. It's fiction.
Well, that's true. Exactly. Well, that's fair.
As long as people get joy from it, then I don't really see the problem. I've never understood the policing of like ships and things like that.
I guess I just meant like if you were, you're right. You're absolutely right. I guess I maybe just didn't word that correctly, but yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I don't think that, because that's an interesting place to take this. I've been accused of being a bad person for relating to Kylo Ren, and I've been accused of supporting abuse for wanting to ship Ben Solo with Rey. So let's talk about that, because I think with the sequel trilogy bringing shipping so much into the mainstream, and as three people who generally lean left to the dial and want to make sure that we're seeing progressive and healthy and varieties of different character dynamics and different people represented, I understand the desire to look at something and be like, oh, well, that's abusive if you look at it in this way, and we shouldn't be showing that. Like, I get where that comes from, but a lot of the people who call Reylo like abusive and things like that, they're very much cherry picking. They're looking at one side of the argument. And look, at the end of the day, if you feel that way, you feel that way. I'm not going to try to tell you shouldn't feel the way you feel. But to then go out and accuse other people of supporting that in real life because of what they ship, that's really, because it goes beyond just, oh, I like this ship and I think it's way better than that ship. It's, I don't like that ship, and I think people who ship it are bad people. Like that has, I feel like it's probably always been there. I would assume, but I feel like it's become so much bigger now, and that's really unfortunate because that should not be a thing.
And what I think is such a shame about that is I think a lot of the people who say that have a hard time because I feel like to view someone as a bad person just for the fiction they enjoy, as long as they can separate that, just shows that you can't separate fiction from reality. If you feel like you have to ascribe a person to a relationship you don't like, I feel like the reason people don't really understand, because I think you can not like something, but again, if you come and attack people, I lose sympathy very fast. I think the reason why people attack are either because they're defensive, because they want to justify their own thing, or they just don't understand that this is not meant to be a model of life. And this isn't even to a Star Wars thing. If Rey and Kylo, you took out all the things and you did like, oh, it's like a real world AU, right? You took out the Force bonds, you took out all the lightsabers and stuff, and you put that relationship in the real world, and it plays out exactly as it does, but just as like in a rom-com or some shit, or like in just a romantic tragedy or something like that. It still ends the way it does, and people can, oh, well, that's abusive, or whatever they want to say, right? The point is, it is not about this being a model for you to do your relationships based on. This is about exploring what it means to love. And love is a very complex, messy, aggressive beast of a thing. And for writers to explore that, they sometimes do have to go to more uncomfortable territory. Now, I think Reyna was extremely fucking tame compared to some things. Like, it is no Joker and Harley Quinn, which is explicitly abusive. But even that, people who like the Joker and Harley Quinn together, normally, unless they're doing a Suicide Squad thing, which is glorifying it, normally understand that it's just there to show the dangers of that and how love can be twisted and weaponized. Reylo isn't that. Reylo's about how love can reform and can transform. Where it is like a direct opposite to Anakin's fall, is like Kylo's rise. Is Anakin falls in love, and love and his desire and his selfish love is what eventually destroys him. Whereas Kylo is he learns to selflessly love, and that's what rises him up. And literally the rise, yeah, it's all there. But like it's meant to be telling you something. It's meant to be a theme. It's not how to relationship 101. And the sad thing is a lot of people who call these things abusive will then also try and talk to gals as if they're Han Solo, and not realize that that isn't also not normally gonna work a lot of the time. Like these are fictional characters, and they're meant to explore these things, but they are not indicative of real life, and people should not assume that people who enjoy that type of fiction are asking to emulate that. And I think it's very hard to explain that to people, and it's very hard to get that across in such a wide manner, because when people attack something, it's normally just a gut response. They're not thinking about it. But that's what always disappoints me whenever I see that, right, is because it shows that they are not engaging with it as a piece of art. They're engaging it as a testament to life, almost. Like they can't separate the fact that it's meant to be a painting, almost. Like it's you're interpreting it. You're not basing yourself off it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's completely true. Some people, when they watch movies and films and things, they're just looking for, I guess, the lesson in it. And Star Wars, I feel like, still has plenty of lessons that you can follow. Like, the themes are really what we're supposed to pay attention to in Star Wars. And I think one of the main recurring themes is love, and that love can change people and save people. Because it, like, even though it makes Anakin fall because he's, like, so worried about Padme, it also is ultimately what brings him back to the light. because he finds out that he does have a son and he loves Luke enough that he comes back. And I think that message has always been there, and some people seem to just kind of sweep that under the rug, at least in the case of the sequel trilogy, they seemed to. Because a lot of people just came at the issue as if Kylo was irredeemable and all of this stuff when we literally saw Anakin kill children, like, almost on screen.
That's what I see. That's what I see a lot of, which is baffling to me. Is a lot of the majority of people who do this will then in the same sentence be like, Darth Maul's such a badass, or like, man, Kylo and Hux are together are so good. It's just like, guys, it's like, that's when it shows to me that is just the person doesn't really believe that, right?
Yeah.
So you're 100% right.
Yeah, a lot of Kylux shippers are like, well, not a lot, but I see a lot of anti Reylo people.
Like lumping people together.
Right. I don't want to lump people together either, but I have seen people who will be anti Reylo, but then they'll be very pro Kylux, but they'll be anti Reylo because it's abusive. And I'm like, well, something like Kylux would be just as abusive if we're going to use that term towards it in the same way that you are using the same criteria. So I mean, it comes down to, I feel like people who say that don't necessarily believe it. It's just a gut. It's just, they don't like this thing, and that's their like gut go-to. They're trying to rationalize why they don't like it. And that's obviously something that we all need to do, is whenever we see a ship and wherever we see a ship we like or don't like, some part of us is going to try to figure out what about it attracts us to that ship, and what about that ship do we not like. But then trying to ascribe what we don't like about that ship and just saying that's what it is, and being accusatory in that way towards people who like it, that's where you run into that problem.
And it's something that I think is just inherent to discourse, especially with like younger fans, because it's easier to have the buzzword of it's abusive, and if once someone says that and then it gets like a good response, and everyone will hang on that, because it doesn't necessarily mean they believe it, but they know that's the thing I can use to get under someone's skin. That's the thing that I'll use to make this person upset. It happens in many fandoms, with many things, but for sure, if you want to pick on like what people use against ships, that's a big one that comes up a lot. And I think something what I think is interesting with Star Wars is so much of it is about these larger than life concepts brought to a very real place, that by taking love and then escalating it to the biggest degree, and then bringing it down and escalating it again with different characters and different parts of the franchise, I think it's hard for people to reconcile that. I think they think it all has to be one thing, and if it isn't that, then it comes across, well, if it's not like that, then it must be bad because I like that, and the opposite of what I like must be bad. It's something can't be good in a different way, or to appealing to a different audience. And I think that's kind of if you want to like boil it down to what the core of shipping with Star Wars is, because Star Wars has such a universal reach. So many people will show Star Wars as a kid, or you'll just see one of the things offhandedly and you'll get hooked in, or the big resurgence that happened with The Force Awakens, and so many people have different entryways to Star Wars, but it's such a broad appeal thing that because people are inherently looking for love just as how we're wired, as just like, oh yeah, that's how we want to see, is to find that partner, sometimes not, but like, again, just why the appeal of shipping is there. The fact that it reaches so far is going to cause so many different communities who latch onto different characters. One of the great things about Star Wars is every single character has like a book about them, right? Like you can look into, if you like Hux and you've only watched the movies, you're like, oh yeah, then you've, like you said, Matt, is like, you read the novels, you're like, oh my god, he's like a completely different guy, or he's got all this extra backstory and stuff like to him. Because people can do that with all these different characters, it almost invites shipping more than other things, because it becomes part of that flavor. It becomes part of that minutia where if you've dedicated your life and you know all these things about a certain character and you see that on screen and it affirms some of your headcanons for like ships and stuff, it's the best feeling in the world. But equally so, if you've put all this time into investment, and I saw this happen with a lot of Reylos, I'm sure you two specifically as well, is there are so many fan fictions and so many things talking about the happy ending, and then Rise of Skywalker ends the way it does with Ben. It's gotta suck, right? So I can understand why there is such a support group for shipping in Star Wars, but also why there is such a toxic air around some parts of it. I think the actual shippers themselves are quite nice in their communities. It's when those communities clash, or when outside communities clash against them, is where bad blood starts from all over, which is a shame.
Yeah. I mean, that's generally what I've seen, is usually within the community, I don't see a whole lot of infighting until usually someone from like a neighboring community who is still within the Star Wars shipping, but they ship a different thing, like the anti-Reylo movement, caused a lot of conflict, and that's where most of the toxicity was coming from. But I don't think, like, within their own communities, people seem to be generally positive, and I think people do derive a lot of joy from shipping, or else they wouldn't do it.
For sure. Yeah.
Do you guys have anything else you want to talk about? We're about wrapped up, and I can't think of anything. But again, I'm probably the one with the least experience here.
Carly, you're probably the one who has the most experience out of all of us. I was not really into shipping as a kid. How have you seen shipping change over time, and how has it reacted to Star Wars? Has Star Wars had a large effect on shipping in general, or has it just amplified the voices that were already there?
I would say it's pretty much just amplified the voices that were already there. Shipping has always been a pretty gigantic community. I think Star Wars just kind of made it, like, it might have grown with Star Wars, but only because Star Wars seemed more accessible, because it's such a big franchise and because people were talking about it on social media and that sort of thing. So people who maybe had shipped their entire lives but didn't really tell anyone about that could now suddenly talk to their friends about, like, this film, because their friends might not have watched whatever TV show or like comic that they were really into. But with Star Wars, most people went to see Star Wars. So it became a conversation that people could have with like people in real life for once. And I think that's pretty much where it blew up. It was formerly pretty much all online, and you talked to people about it on the internet. I didn't really know people in real life who liked the same things I did. But Star Wars just made it huge.
Yeah, I mean, you even have, like, I'm kind of curious how similar people's experiences to maybe something like I had, where, like, as a kid growing up watching different cartoon shows that had ensemble casts, like the X-Men cartoon show and things like that. And in my head, watching those shows and being like, oh man, those two characters would be really something together. They'd be really cute together or whatever. But I didn't read fan fiction or write fan fiction. I didn't know I was like doing a thing. Like, I just thought, oh, those characters would be cute together. Unfortunately for me, that was Kurt and Rogue in X-Men Evolution, and they whatever, this life. And then you something like Star Wars comes along, and you're like, oh, that's like a thing that people do called shipping, and like there's whole websites that are in practice basically dedicated to it. And so that's I mean, that's sort of that, like, it's this thing that I think a lot of people have always done, like people who are nerds who consume fiction. I think we've always shipped. I just think not everyone was like actively shipping and reading fan fictions. And I think Star Wars, MCU, things like that have gotten big. I think it's taken some of those people who are like casual shippers, if that's a thing, and kind of made them more into the idea of shipping. And like you were saying earlier, Alfie, you've got to be really into something to really care about the ship, and you've got to really be invested in these characters to want to participate in the discourse of character dynamics and stuff like that. So I think it's ultimately a very cool and awesome expression of love for whatever fandom or whatever character, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a good positive note to end on. Please, I'd actually be really curious if anyone watching this in the comments could say their favorite ships. I want to spread the love, spread the positivity. But yeah, I think this has been a good one. Thank you for joining me again, Matt, and thank you, Carly, for coming on and spreading much more knowledge about this than either of us bozos.
Well, thank you for having me.
We need a review topic for next week, and it would be my turn. However, it would just be me doing a review and then Matt doing a review. Carly, you have to come back for this, but is there something you can, if you wanted to, you could, but is there something you could get me and Matt to review? Be a movie, TV show, comic book, what have you?
Do you have like guidelines or anything?
No, it can normally be anything, as long as it's
Can be
not
anything.
as long as something we haven't done before. But if it's just me and Matt talking, it can probably be something like we've done before as well.
What about Alien?
Alien,
Yes,
the very first Alien.
the first one.
Let me have a look. Geeky gentleman Alien. Oh yeah, we have done that one. But I mean, if it's just me and Matt, it would be something different. That might be fun, actually, though. That might be fun because then we can like have a completely different take than what Ian did. So we could he could be like, "Oh, I love it so much," and be like, "Oh, we shit on it constantly." That could be fun. That'd be like a redux.
I'll give you Alien or Alien to the Fourth Power, either one.
Alien to the Fourth Power. Did he do
Yes.
that? I don't think he's done that. I think we could. Can we just do the first one?
The first one is a much better film.
That's why I'm like, hold on a second here. No, he hasn't done that. All right.
If we do the fourth one, I'm gonna have to rewatch the other three.
Yeah, I mean, you haven't seen the fourth one.
Have I not?
Yep. I've told you about it, but we've never actually watched it.
Okay. Well then. I swear. Thanks for listening, everyone. This is still, we don't stop recording until we come up with a review topic, so. Are you? Your mic sounds real quiet. I don't know if you're trying to talk to us right now or not.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you go.
Okay, that was very strange. I was just gonna say we'll do the fourth one because I don't want to.
All right.
I don't want to.
Fantastic.
I don't want to make Ian's previous video not get like searched up if it's the same title.
Fair enough.
So there, you will join us next time on Geeky Gentleman. I am the champion of the oppressed.
I'm the Sonic erotica lover.
I am one with the Master Emerald.
That's hype.
That's so hype.
That's pretty hype.
That's hype.